All right, Zig coming in on the top 10 of the show. We have Joe Cannon, singer-songwriter of the band The Resurrectionists, who have a new album out now called Now That We Are All Ghost. It's available now on all streaming platforms. They also did a really cool film adaptation of the release where every song has a video made by a few different filmmakers, and then they had a film fest release to accompany the album release as well. And that's all available now on the YouTube channel. We are going to listen to a tune before we get into this conversation. The tune is called Classic Dictionary of the Vulgar Tongue. The album is Now That We Are All Ghost. The band is The Resurrectionists. Here we go. A Classic Dictionary of the Vulgar Tongue. Now That We Are All Ghost is the album. Resurrectionist, available now on all streaming platforms. There's some Wattism in that, yeah? Very cool. I enjoyed this talk with Joe. We got into the kind of specific details of guitar picking and banjo playing and philosophical thinkers. And it was a good chat, and I think you guys are going to enjoy it. I'm excited to share it. Before that, if you guys can like, rate, review, subscribe to the podcast on any of the podcast platforms, it really helps me talk to cool guests and share their insights with you. So without further ado, here's my chat with Joe. Well, to jump into it, man, you got like so many bands. Like to trace like your like, band origin.
You tried to do the history.
I tried to do the history, and it's all
it goes back to the early '90s. I think I did a count. I mean, including sort of like things that hit a stage once and like did a pickup show or something. I think I was up to like 26 or 27 bands at some point. But it's over the course of 30 years. So that's less than a band a year. Come on.
But it's like when you get those like projects that you're trying to like, it's so hard to get an original thing going with a committed like group.
No, I mean, and so over the course of time, I've probably been in, I don't know, maybe like 8 or 9 projects that, lasted longer than a couple of months and released something, that kind of a thing.
Gotcha. Either way, it was like, I don't know where to go back. But the one I went back to is Work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so Work was one of the longer projects then, yeah?
Yes, and Work is a good one to go back to because there's a common member. The bassist in Resurrectionists. The bassist in Resurrectionists was also the bassist in Work. So Work was this trio, and we were together probably about 6 years, and it was one of those things where we were hitting a nice little stride, had just put out a record we were proud of, and then the drummer announces that he's moving to Austin, Texas. Yeah.
Sick.
And so, yeah, exactly. So I'm like, so those records live in my attic. So I continue trying to play with Jeff, our bassist, and we tried on a couple of different kinds of projects, like even one where he and I would both play guitar and we'd find somebody else to play bass. And we eventually settled on what became Resurrectionists, which itself has had 2 significantly different lineups. Our original lineup with the pedal steel player, and a much more sort of chamber country kind of sound. And then when the pedal steel player moved, as these people keep doing, he moved upstate New York. And he was just such a unique character, like a very good pedal steel player who was into like weirdo rock music, as opposed to, there's not very many pedal steel players in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And the ones that we do have pretty much just want to play like traditional sounds.
Right. Well, it's like, it's interesting. Have you ever messed with one?
No, not more than putzing around with it a little bit. They confuse me.
They're so confusing because I play a lot of lap steel, and like I have a friend who has a pedal steel, and I looked into getting one. They're like a couple grand,
and that's to get one that's like serviceable.
Right.
Yeah, I've often said that if I could wave my hands and turn off time for a year, I would learn pedal steel, because I think it would take like me not doing anything else in my life but learn pedal steel for like a year, and I'd probably be, serviceable. But seeing as I can't do that, I just continue with my guitar and banjo.
Which is, I mean, banjo, like, if you put them together, you almost get like a pedal steel effect because it's like
A little bit.
you got the open tune on the banjo, and then like, but with pedal steel, it's like laid out and like a lot of them are that like open, what does he call it? A C6 tuning, which is that
there's this
country sound, you know?
Right. There's a C6 tuning, and then there's like an E tuning. Like the pedal steels that like there's two kinds of pedal steels. One has like one set of strings and frets, and one will actually have two.
Yeah.
And the ones that have two are because there's the two tunings. Gavin demonstrated this to us a few times, and like he'd play a little line on the one and play a little line on the other, and it would be like, and it was like, oh, it's that kind of country song, and oh, it's that kind of country song. It's like the C6 has got this like somewhat little bit more like chordy and mournful kind of tone to it, whereas the E1 is like more the like the lickety split sound of like pedal steel shredding, that kind of thing.
That's cool, man. You got
but I mean, and the thing with pedal steels for me is the bending, like those like that's the sound that you just cannot replicate with anything else.
That's true. That's very true.
I mean, that's like they've got those Telecasters with the little like B bender apparatus, which can give you a little bit of it, but there's just nothing like a pedal steel. There's nothing, and so we didn't try to replace it with something that would be a replacement for it. We like disassembled and reassembled all the songs with a different player, because when Gavin left, I started talking to my friend John, who is, I refer to him as our unofficial music historian. He's played in a bunch of different bands and has a very sort of unusual ear. And so I just kind of gave him the songs, and I was like, look, I don't know what to do with these. What do you think? And he came back with some really interesting ideas. Like a heavily affected, almost noise rock 12-string, and then like various keyboard sounds, and we settled on a mellotron sound. So it's and it's very, very, very different than having the pedal steel on there. It's a it's a bit more of a rock band setup. And the one thing I love the pedal steel, but the one thing about the pedal steel is that this novelty. And so I kind of got the feeling that like every song was sort of about the fact that there's a pedal steel on the song. And so now I've actually grown to like what we do now a lot more, in part because what John brings into it is so versatile. He can bring really aggressive noise, or counter melodies, or really atmospheric chordal ideas. And it's very cool. And so it's like he can, and my joke is that like the other three members of the band were like here, like dickering about trying to figure out how to arrange a song. And then he's off in his corner doing science. And then eventually he'll like we'll finish something up, and then he'll like, well, what do you think about this? And it'll be like something completely unexpected that we're like, well, yeah, there we go. Song's finished.
Well, it's interesting because that kind of fills all those voids that a pedal steel is kind of limited but can do. Like the pedal steel has that atmospheric, melodic approach, but it has that with kind of everything. And like and like I agree with what you're saying. Most of those guys, when you get into that, the tradition is to hit like that country standard. So to find someone who's willing to like utilize it as a plane from like the kind of creative punk rock ethos space, it's tough. But I think with how you have it set up now with the the 12-string, because my band I put a 12th string through an amp a lot as well, so I get it. But you get like a different type of overtone, you get a different type of fullness to that space, and it has that melodic approach, and it kind of fits in with the banjo a little bit. It has that like kind of like a country, but also like the what you described, the weird rockness to it.
Right. Well, the thing with John, the other sort of decision that he made early on is he's like, I'm going to play a 12-string, but I'm not going to play it like a 12-string. So it's like you're never going to hear like the Birds style jangly chords happening. He's just not going to do that. He's going to play a 12 string, but it's going to sound like the weird sounds on a Wire record, or he'll play solos with it. He was remarking with pride a couple nights ago to me. He was like, "Yeah, I heard somebody saying that you just can't play like single note lines with bends on a 12 string." And so, yeah, I did that. So it was like, there's this one song where he's playing like a legit solo in the back. It's like this counter melody with bends. And he was like, I did that because people told me I couldn't.
That's the badassery. That's the punk rockness to it. That's cool. So it's interesting too, because like structure wise for you guys, like the songs are kind of like they take like a completely different structure in a way. And
yes,
I saw, I don't know if it was an article or something, but it was you guys referred to or were referring to Perubu. Is that kind of
we've gotten the comparison a couple of times. I'm a big Perubu fan.
Very cool.
John, I know I don't know if Jeff and Josh are really aware of them beyond like just name recognition. I don't know if they've listened to them a whole lot, but yeah, they're in the background there. They're one of those bands where it's like it's never like on the front burner when I'm working on something, but anytime I get compared to it, I get a little flutter in my chest,
I can it definitely rings through with like the structure of like how these tunes take.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things that Perubu does is like they're playing a traditional. Well, traditional is a hard, rock and roll is rock music is old enough that it has traditions now. So they're playing a sort of traditional style of music, but then they're like screwing it up.
Yeah.
Like intentionally screwing it up. And we do a lot of stuff like that. We're very impatient. It's like if we're like, guys, we've been playing this part for like 8 seconds now. That's a really long time. It's like it's like, and so it's like we'll have parts of songs that we call the chorus, but it's like a decision to play it twice in the song. I'm like, it is the chorus, and you usually play those more than once. And the rest of the band's like, I don't know.
That's cool though. Like when David Thomas from Perubu's got this quote about how Perubu's like, and he picks up a coffee cup. He's like, "This is music, and we're analyzing." He points from the bottom. He's like, "This is where we look at it." And I talked with him like about a year ago, and
wonderful.
He like he has like a synthetic synesthesia with like geometric shapes. That's how he hears music, is in shapes, which is really interesting. So that whole
interesting
structure thing, like, and how you guys utilize it for your for this record and the last record, like it's very reminiscent to that, like how he structures shapes in his mind musically.
Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of thing that, because it's weird to say, but in certain respects, a lot of what we do is almost through composed, where it's like there'll be recurring elements, but it's really like the arrangement process can be really meticulous and kind of difficult sometimes, and we will hassle a song for months. And a lot of it is because instead of like, oh, here's the verse, here's the chorus, here's the bridge. It's a lot more of like, here are these 3 or 4 musical ideas that I think all go together, and maybe they do, and we have to figure out how to knit them together in a way that makes some sense.
So when they're like a musical idea like that, is it a progression? Is it a riff? Is it a melody? Is it like a lyric?
It's usually not a lyric. Because like a lyric alone isn't going to drive a song, because there needs to be like a musical, like a harmonic or melodic or rhythmic idea.
Right, I agree with that.
I'm usually writing, so I'm the one that will bring like a half-formed idea into practice, and usually when I do that, there is a vocal line. So generally speaking, I'm not going to bring something in unless I have like 2 parts and some idea of how those parts go together or more, so it's like two parts, and then there's usually some kind of vocal idea that struck me, and I'm like, okay, this is cool enough that I think I can bring it in and we can start working on it.
And then the puzzle
And the
piece
musical
starts.
ideas are usually like a chord progression, or a melodic harmonic line. I mean, I play finger style, and so a lot of times I will be playing around with that, and then I'll develop something that will then sort of like fall out into like more than one instrument's parts. And so it's like a lot of times it's like adapting things like that. And sometimes like the guitar line that I bring in, I'll just like give over to Jeff, and that'll become the bass line. And then I'll play something different over it. So it's like these kinds of things are, there's a variety of different ways that it goes. I mean, and now that we know each other better and we've played together for, 3 or 4 years now, I mean, and I've played with Jeff for like, 10 or 12 years. It's, we're doing a bit more kind of ground up, just somebody starts playing something in practice and we develop it from there. We've got a few songs that are like that. Not on the record that we released, but in like the group of songs that we're working on that we haven't recorded yet.
Very cool. Then like it makes sense like when you're like kind of, especially coming from a finger picking type of like style playing. Do you play guitar like that too, or is that banjo?
I Both.
Okay. And
Yeah,
like
I developed a weird kind of finger picking style. I had a solo project back when I was living in Chicago called The Intelligibles, and it was sort of a showcase for these tweaked finger style techniques that I developed. Like it's like I don't do any of this stuff right. I make things sound the way I want them to sound. Like if I with banjo is also an example. It's like if I play the banjo in front of somebody who's like traditionally trained on banjo, it's like the pain in their face is palpable. It's like show me where the bad man hurt you.
Was it? Well, it's like a Victor Wooten's got this bit. It's theory is not fact. It's a theory,
Right.
and like I feel like technique's the same thing. It should serve the purpose of what you're trying to express,
Right.
and if you develop a new technique for that, that becomes that new approach. You know what I mean? Like,
Right. Right.
and like banjo itself, like like the scrugs or the claw hammer technique
Right.
is very cool, and
Hmm.
but also very like also it fits in like claw hammer is almost a double thumbing if we look at Victor Wooten. It's like it's
Yeah.
very like it can be one thing and the next, and how you utilize that is
Right.
that's the essence of music is whoever's playing it in whatever way they do, and like
Right.
but I think it's almost I find like when I dabble with a guitar or a banjo or something with open tuning, it's kind of like this refresh, like a plunge into the creative pit because
Right.
everything else is so structured and formulated. Like as far as guitar, right? If you're playing
Hmm.
guitar, there's guitar expectations that notify that guitar. You know what I mean? Like
Yes.
you did
Yes.
the pentatonic bit there. Nice choice, my friend. Carry on.
Right. 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 Right.
So
Definitely. Definitely. Yeah. And so the way I sometimes think about this is that like um there is a traditional repertoire and a traditional set of performance expectations for things like the banjo and for things like fingerstyle guitar. And when I go into it, I'm always acknowledging that if you ask me to sit down and do it right in a traditional way, I would be unable to. But if you like sit me down in like, like a rock band setting or a blues setting or something like that with a guitar, I'd be perfectly fine playing something that like was, normal.
right, right. Well, it
It's
takes
like I can play the guitar normal in a rock context. I can't play normal in with banjo or fingerstyle guitar. I play my tweaked, weird way of doing it, and that's what I do.
yeah. Well, which makes it right. So there's no wrong. That's awesome.
Exactly. Exactly.
Very cool. One thing so you also play in a project called Delicious Monster,
I do. I
and
do.
your drummer was from a band called Delicious and Nutritious. Does he play with you in Delicious Monster, or is that just
No,
like a
no, no,
tasty
no.
crossover?
that's just a that's a coincidence in naming. No, Josh does not play in Delicious Monsters. Our drummer's name is Jim.
Okay. So
Yeah.
like, does a delicious monster? Are you carrying over that kind of finger picking, that kind of
No,
freeness? No.
Delicious. Well, I mean, there's a lot of freeness. Delicious Monsters is it's kind of like a wiry post punk band. I am not writing the lyrics, and I am not the vocalist. Our vocalist is named Zelda, and
Whoa, cool.
yeah, and she's amazing. And that band is very much a we come into practice, we start playing stuff, and one of us likes something and is like, hey, keep playing that, and then we build the songs up like that. The one odd thing in Delicious Monsters compositionally, which is the first time I've ever done this, is the music, the songs are instrumentally complete before Zelda even starts working with them. So it's really interesting to see her craft lyrics and vocal lines around something that's instrumentally complete, as opposed to like everything else I do where I'm the vocalist. I'm writing the song and like the repetition involved in writing the song and arranging it and stuff like that. I'm at the same time working on the lyric idea and adding to it little by little, as opposed to Delicious Monsters, where it's like the band works up a song and then hands it over to Zelda, and she puts it, and she crafts a vocal line for it.
Yeah, that is like. Well, I mean, does she play anything else or?
She's currently just a singer. There's some talk of she owns a theremin, and there's been some
Sick.
talk of bringing a theremin in, but that's down the road.
I just got one of those for my girlfriend got me one for Christmas, which is probably the worst idea for everyone else around me. But
Oh, I'm sure.
there's like it's got like a cool like I got one that you can set it. You can set the sensitivity to like it basically it pitch corrects it. It's like using pitch correction, so it cancels out,
Okay.
and when you wave your hand, it just goes to the note that you're closest to via the scale.
So you're going to be like the T-Pain of theremin players.
Yeah. I won't be the Dr. Mad vibes that I want to be. I'm going to be the PhD plugins. But that's awesome. It's a really cool like Moog theremin. It's probably
Neat.
You can set the scale too, so you can really get past the kind of like the difficulty of the theremin, which is like everything, and really start being creative with it. It's still hard though, because you gotta like hold the note. I haven't used it on a gig yet.
Yeah, no, I've played around with them, and it's easy to make them like do wibbly wobbly stuff, but it's really hard to make them do anything consistent.
Right. And like or just like even sing a melody where you skip a note. You're like, oh.
Right.
Like, but that's cool. So, the kind of like well, I guess going back to the intelligibles, was that before, after, or during the time of the early risers, where like you were playing banjo for the first time or first?
It was Intelligibles was earlier than that. Intelligibles was like 98 to 2000. It's basically like I had moved to Chicago, and I was trying to start finding people to play with. And it can be challenging to, break into a new city's scene and actually find people to play with. So while I was working on that, I started working up this set of songs and playing it by myself. And the solo stuff kind of went by the wayside once I was actively playing with people.
And what did that look like? Mic nights? Like, what did that kind of hunt look like? Going to mic nights, finding other shows, hanging, like.
I didn't really ever do any open mic nights. It was more. I would pitch myself to shows. I got a handful of pretty good ones. I opened for Songs Ohio once. I was mostly like this was like the late '90s, so it was a whole lot of like cold calling the Empty Bottle and seeing if they had an opening slot they needed somebody to fill, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a totally different approach. Now you cold message and you see
Right,
that it
exactly.
never gets
Yeah.
read. Like at least a
Right,
call
right.
to you, someone's like, "Oh, I'll call back."
Right, right, right.
Oh, that's funny. But
Yeah.
that's cool. That's cool. I guess that's the
And
only way to do it is to jump in. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut
right.
you off.
No, no, not at all. And so then after Intelligibles, I was sort of playing in two bands at once for a while. One was called Check Engine, one was called The Afflictions. Check Engine was kind of like a post punk math rock kind of thing, and The Afflictions was a garage band. And then I played with, and then Early Risers, strangely enough, kind of combined members of both of those bands after both of those bands had ended. And I started playing banjo. Um, no, it was like the keys player from the garage punk band and the saxophone player and vocalist of Check Engine, and then and then the rhythm section of an Iowa City hardcore band, because why not?
I was gonna say it's interesting. Like all these bands you've been in, like they all have like a wide variety of genre and approach. Like,
Yeah.
do you when joining these bands or when starting to play with these bands, is it kind of pronounced like we are going for this, or is that just per circumstance?
Um, it's there's occasionally so like the Afflictions was like, okay, we're a garage punk band, we're a weird garage punk band, but we're a garage punk band, like we play shows with other garage punk bands and that's what we do. That was the kind of, that was one where that band had, a very particular genre that we weren't gonna like, waver from too much, aside from like doing it in our own kind of goofy way. um but the other bands are more, I more frequently find myself finding a group of people I like playing with, working up a bunch of songs, and then trying to figure out what the hell we just did. Because it's like the worst question for me ever is like, so what does your music sound like? And I'm like, I have no goddamn idea.
Every time I get that, I think of that Joe Strummer tune where it's like it's like a, it's kind of like a, it's just like I'm talking the
Right,
Mescaleros tune where it hits that line of just like he names all these genres.
right, right,
Um,
exactly, exactly.
that's a, it's really interesting, like kind of freeness, like within all your prod, and I think it's within you, like as far as like that Perubu like Dadaist,
Right.
that like freeness with it, like, and that's a hard like kind of like thing to group a like to rope a group of people around because I feel like a lot of people are like we gotta know what we're doing. What's you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I mean, because I generally try to surround myself with people who are unusual musicians in their own right, who I enjoy the way that they're unusual, so that it meshes where, they're likely to play something that's going to perk up my ear and make me want to play something, that so then it becomes, so then there's a kind of alchemy to it where, this grouping of people brings these various things together that then get intertwined in this really interesting way, and that kind of a thing. I mean, and so for me it's like I quail at trying to put genre names on what I do, but there's this sort of commonality that runs through it because there's certain kinds of chord changes, there's certain kinds of like intervals and tensions and things like that I like. There's certain kinds of melodies that I like, so I've got these kind of paths that I follow. And so anything I do is going to be shaped in some way by just like, these preferences I've developed over years, whether it's, in a context that's like a country song or, you know, a noise rock thing or a garage punk band. It's like there's going to be these kind of like ideas that I keep going back to.
And with those kind of like melodic, was that like stuff you like were kind of trying to figure out from the beginning of picking up guitar?
I've become more melodic as time's gone on. I've gotten better at it. Used to be something that I was not as good at.
Because like you started like with piano, right? And your piano teacher was like, you should do guitar. So I guess
Yeah.
my lineage with that question is like, is that kind of like inner like melodic interval, like the stuff that really appealed to you? Is that something like when you
Right.
first started playing, when whoever was teaching you was like, this is, you go to rock and roll, or you know what I mean? Like,
Right. It's interesting. I don't think I got too much. So, I mean, the one thing I got from piano was, you know, like, the white keys and the black keys, the way that you kind of like, the scales and the modes kind of just like lay out before you. You could just kind of visualize them, by looking down at a, you know, at a piano keyboard and say like, oh well, this scale is going to have the flat 3 and the flat 7, and like, it's just kind of looking at it and seeing the intervals, which if you had only played guitar, you probably wouldn't have the same, like sort of visual sense for it. But apart from that, I don't think I got too much from it in the sense of like, I don't go back to the piano and play it to write or anything like that. I don't dislike it. It's just like it's not like a thing for me.
yeah, it's almost, well, it's kind of hard because it's so traditionally kind of set in a way that if you
Hmm.
try to approach it in a different fashion, you often don't find it as like, it's hard to make it sound as interesting, or maybe as close to like a string instrument that you hold closer to your body, and you can make melodic and like different like technique choices and be kind of
Right.
celebrated you know what I mean, like when you look at even like the guitar kind of standard virtuosos, you see like Eddie Van Halen who's doing his own thing, but Jimi Hendrix is doing his, you know what I mean, like
Right.
there's a really physical different way where a piano, it's like it's kind of melodic and harmonic choices which separate
Right.
the individuality of the player.
Right. You can hit the key or not hit the key. You can
Right.
hit the key harder or softer, but there's not quite as much. I mean, and the other thing with guitar is, you know, for most, for most notes, there's two or more places to play them.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And the way that the way that the note sounds, if it's played as an open ringing string or as the fifth fret of another string, is going to have a different sound. And so there's a lot of sort of like tonal flexibility.
Right, right. Which makes it completely like, as far as like doing the standard thing and reading, a nightmare. But when it becomes to like finding individuality, it makes it like night and day, because like you're
Right.
saying, like I can play C on this guitar and you can play C on that guitar and can be completely different
Right.
expressions. Okay,
Right.
that's cool. Um, One thing I wanted to kind of pick apart was like Thomas Mann in some of these like lyrics, like,
Yeah.
which is cool. Like, get into your records is kind of like, I wasn't aware of his writing. Um, so like the whole idea of Ghost and becoming Ghost and We Are Ghost, is that
Hmm.
from that, or is that?
To a certain degree, there's like, so for example, there's a scene in the Magic Mountain, uh, where the some of the characters conduct a séance, and it's unclear whether something happened or whether they all just kind of like a collective hallucination or something. And that's where, for example, the line in Blue Henry, "The ghost appeared but was mute," is like kind of pulled from that scene. Um, so yeah, there's but the ghost theme was also a little bit of like, I've been obsessed with the notion of ghosts for a very long time. Not necessarily in like the scary movie kind of way, but more in like the idea of of ghosts and memory and passing between different realms, kind of a thing. And so after I kind of so selecting the title of the record, "Now That We Are All Ghosts," is sort of, the idea is we've all just collectively passed through one or more traumatic sequences of our country's history, and now we're on the other side of it. To a certain degree, we might have more trauma to come, depending on how certain things go. But this sort of like, now we've passed through a thing. Now we're all ghosts.
Mm, that's cool. Like the idea of like reflection or nostalgia is a kind of the haunting of like your memory in a way, but doesn't mean it has to
Right.
be haunting in like a negative
No,
context, but that reflection back.
no, that's exactly. I mean, that the haunting in your memory. That's exactly the kind of idea I'm thinking about.
Oh, okay.
You
Okay,
know, the
that's
recurrence. You
yeah.
know, a ghost is something that recurs. It's like it's the past thrust into the present.
Hmm. Yeah, that's fascinating. It is. It's like, and it's interesting, especially because of that. Well, I mean, the other how was it Death in Venice? Like that whole idea of that like plague, uh, and
Yeah.
like going through all that, like, and then going through COVID at the same time. I know you
Right.
mentioned that it wasn't meant to be that
No,
reference.
I was
Oh,
writing those
okay.
lyrics before. I was writing those lyrics in like 2019,
Ah,
like before any of this happened.
yeah.
That was sort of the funny thing about it. It's like I've got all these lyrics on this album that if you're just listening to it, you would assume that it was like, oh, it's like songs about the pandemic. I'm like,
Yeah.
except I wrote them a year before the pandemic.
But that, in a way, like I guess it's perfect timing. But in a way, it kind of it. I think that's why it sets. Besides the difference that it's you and this your group, it sets it apart from that type of like when I listen. I try to listen to everything before reading about it or diving
Hmm.
into it just to get like a raw hearing of it.
Right.
And like it didn't strike me as a pandemic record.
Well,
Like
that's good.
the ghost thing really like concept really like drew my ear in as far as like that whole like kind of memory haunting and like then kind of diving into some of the Thomas Mann like uh um philosophical kind of context is put into it, put
Right.
a different view on it, but like so it didn't strike me as like as that, and so that could be because it's coming from these other outside influences at a time before
Hmm.
that, but going through that like trying to button down these tunes and record them during the time. Was the rest of the group kind of hip to the references, or were they like, "Oh, you're really going through it"?
They don't really. I mean, um, while we're working on the songs, they're not really paying attention to the lyrics. It's like we've talked about the lyrics now that we've had it recorded and the record's been, I mean, the record just came out, but we've had it for a while. And so like, and then also in the course of like mixing and listening to the record, these guys have now all heard these lyrics over and over and over again because we've been, working on it. And so we've had some conversations about it since then, but not while the songs were being.
I guess did was a so I mean these are kind of heavy hidden books and they're not short reads either.
No, they're
Um,
not. I spent a long time. I mean, yeah, Magic Mountain was like a project.
yeah, that's a big one. And like you're getting all these different characters and perspectives, though it's
Right.
all around the same. But so was the song "Work" has a tune called "You Don't Have Tuberculosis." Is that kind of a reference to Magic Mountain as
No,
well?
no, it's not. It's not. I
Okay.
wrote that well before. I wrote that well before I was reading. That um the so some of the a decent amount of the songs on the work records are me musing about the end of I went to graduate school for philosophy and I
Nice.
pursued an academic career for a while. And everything kind of fell apart with when the financial crisis happened in like 2008 2009 because the job market became impossible, and so I work in a different industry now. But a number of the songs in on the work records are sort of musings about graduate school. And I actually had a friend in graduate school who thought he had tuberculosis, and it turned out that he didn't.
Okay,
So,
it's just a very
so
on
that's
the
why
nose.
that's why the name of that song is "As It Turns Out He Didn't Actually Have Tuberculosis." Um, yeah, and that song. I mean, the lyrics of that song are sort of about this weird sort of like trial by combat mentality that permeates like certain kinds of graduate studies.
That yeah, that's is it is like a anything graduate or anything kind of like academic, like especially with philosophy, because philosophy is such a I that was one class when I took because I went to school for music therapy, and like
Okay.
you have to take all the extra extra not what do you call it prereqs, and I got to do one in philosophy, and that like kind of turned my brain on for everything. And like I can it's such an like a fun like even though it's a hard people would argue maybe it's not fun, but a fun kind of like rabbit hole to mentally go down. Like I could have easily seen myself embracing that. Was it like, did you go into like your under or graduate knowing like or into college being inspired by philosophy, or was it like something you
Uh,
picked up
it,
along the way?
it, it was picked up along the way. I actually was there for psychology and kept finding myself wanting to take more and more philosophy classes. And by the time I had finished, I had um, enough. I had enough courses to have a second major.
Oh, that's cool. Because
And
it's like
and then it was like in the course of the few years after that, and reading uh, stuff that I was reading, that I decided to try to go to graduate school for it. Um, yeah, that started me down a very, very strange road.
well, it's interesting because like it's one of those things like for me when I started to read philosophy, I'm like, oh, psychology is philosophy, ideas of the mind. You know, I was able to find like an
Right.
origin point, and like
Hmm.
we can all get into the big questions like. Maybe we all can't, but for me, I can get really into those like big questions and those philosophical like quandaries and like
Right.
like I find that really fascinating. And to see that it
Hmm.
branches off eventually to a
Yeah.
science of some sort is so like
Yeah.
inspiring. But like
Yeah. I mean, I mean, there's the graduate school, like the PhD track in philosophy gets very narrow. Like, so that sort of expansive, I want to think about the big questions kind of thing kind of goes away almost, and you end up finding this little province that you can carve out and defend against all comers about some conceptual wrinkle in some existing set of arguments, that it can be really narrow.
so did it become more kind of like because a lot of philosophy is someone poses an idea, someone rebuttals an idea.
Right.
Did it become more kind of like a toxic like almost like intellectual sporting like
There's a bit of that. There's a
okay.
bit of that. It becomes very professionalized. Um, and it's a weird profession because it's like you get professionalized into this set of skills that is applicable in exactly one place in the universe, and then if you have to not work in that universe, it can be challenging to
Yeah, yeah, no, that makes total sense. It does.
yeah, it's a very strange kind of world, because usually if you know like if you have like a technical skill in the academic context, then you can apply that outside of the academy and find work. And so like you're in demand, and so like other people are competing for you, not just the academy. But certain things like philosophy, there really is only one place that you can apply it, and that's in a university or college setting. And so it makes it difficult, because a lot of people get kind of institutionalized and assume that if they can't succeed in this one particular universe, they are a failure, because it's like there's no world outside of it,
Right,
because
right.
you've meticulously developed this set of aptitudes that only has one application.
Which is it's interesting because that's like the kind of exact opposite of your musical journey in a way.
Right.
Which
And
is
these things were happening in parallel. There's a reason
yeah.
why it took me 10 years to get finish my PhD. It's because I was like playing in three bands the entire time.
Well, you finished it. You got a PhD. That's pretty. You know.
I did. I did finish it. I did finish it, but I didn't do all of the other things you had to do to make yourself like a top flight job candidate. That was the difficulty.
Right. Well, with that kind of like limitation in a way, which is almost the opposite of like some of the like I guess basic the intro level philosopher people you kind of start to dig on and you really get into the opposite of what
Hmm.
it is, you know.
Right.
Um But either way, I'm glad you found your way to what you're doing now, and like the music kind of celebrated the yin and yang energy of it to become what it is.
Hmm. Yep.
So do you like? I guess like just out of is it more? I don't know how to put this. Is it more work or kind of like negative emotion to dive into something like a philosophical read post doing all this PhD work? Like, is it like
I very rarely read professional philosophy anymore. I much more, I mean, so an example is like now I read things like The Magic Mountain. Like if I want to dive into something difficult, I will dive into like a big stupid novel or something, as opposed to like commentary on Kant or whatever. It's just like once it was no longer my profession, I found myself a lot less interested in a lot of it. Still like so basically I still like all the primary sources.
yeah?
The secondary sources,
Well, that's like that's where it starts to like that's where it starts to really branch off into like what I mean like you got you get a recap of everything you heard before. It starts to marvel itself. You know what I mean? Like
right, yeah,
there's
exactly. Because a lot of it is, yeah. I mean, a secondary source is a lot of it is this like, here's a review of all of the things people are saying about this right now, and then like 2 or 3 sentences of here's the thing I'm saying about it.
yeah.
and then here are all the possible objections I have to answer. And it's just like you've written a 250-page long book to defend the 3 sentences you wanted to say.
Right, which is, I mean, I anyone who thinks through their idea that clearly, good for you. But that's
Yeah.
all can be summed up, and then like the third edition, or the third leg of,
Yeah.
is the flaws within those cracks. Which,
Right.
yeah,
Well, I mean, and a lot of people find this, so a lot of people find that sort of like conversation / argument with your peers is like invigorating.
right.
You know, it's like the disagreement is our love language,
Yeah.
because because intelligent disagreement is kind of exciting, like you know, that kind of debate.
Well, it is, and then like it sparks the mind to think in different ways. But I think maybe the
Right.
problem is when like one takes it so personally. You've just written a 400-page book about why you believe this one, like how you said these 3 sentences, and now you said one sentence, which puts my whole book in jeopardy. Like,
Yeah, well, right. There's a lot of that. But it's not. I mean, it's Jeopardy. I don't know. It's like
yeah,
one of those things where there's the payoff of the conclusion, but then there's also the payoff of the conversation itself.
right. Which is going back to Plato or Socrates. That's all it's ever been. It's just
Right.
combo, and like that's okay. That's cool. That's cool because like I agree with I've only found myself in like I guess first sources. I think the only like
Right.
I don't know if it would be second. What's the history of Western civilized by Bernard Russell, the big one.
Right. Bertrand.
Bertrand. Yeah.
Yeah. That would be. That would be more of like that's an interesting one, because I mean it is his own personal take on it. Generally speaking, when I'm talking about secondary, it would be something like, so the philosopher that I spent most of my time on was Kant,
Okay.
the
Oh
German
man.
philosopher.
Yeah.
And so like, like, so he wrote numerous books on ethics, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of disagreement about what exactly he means by various and sundry things, like the concept of duty or the concept of of reason or something like that. And so there'll be books where it's like like Kant on the moral law, and like then there'll be like 50 books that have titles very similar to Kant on the moral law. And and like what it is like these people who are sort of like the leading scholars right now on that, and like them rehearsing their agreements and their disagreements and that sort of thing. And to the non-professional reader, it's utterly inscrutable.
Well, it's like, well, it's so much because even what's Kant's big work on intelligence? It's like 800 or I
Oh, the
can't.
Critique of Pure Reason.
Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
man, like because I dove into Kant a little bit and I was gonna read that and I'm like, oh man, this will be the next 3 years. I think I'll come back to this one.
Yeah, I mean
Like,
that's a book that you need commentary to read. You're
yeah.
not going to just dive into it. I mean, and part of the problem with a lot of this stuff is, you know, he's doing like, Critique of Pure Reason is a book that in like the in its time, like the 1780s, he's in conversation with a bunch of people that nobody reads anymore. And so a lot of the things that are confusing about that work, aside from the fact that Kant was a terrible writer, um, the one of the difficulties of a work like that is like you got to know, it's like somebody who's trained in this, who's read it a bunch, and who's like dived into the era that he was writing in. You'll read something and it's like, oh, I know why he's writing that, because he's arguing against so and so. He's Christian Wolff said X, Y, and Z, and nobody in the universe reads Christian Wolff anymore, except he was important in the 1780s. And so Kant had to have like the little thing in the book that's addressing, the potential objection from this guy that nobody reads anymore.
Right.
And then you like multiply that by 1,000, and it becomes an exceptionally difficult book to read.
Right. Well, and that's I think a lot of what makes any kind of philosophical read difficult is that, or like even old. It's like old comedy. I don't get why this is funny, because I don't know what Lenny Bruce is referring to at this moment. You know what I mean? Like
Right,
it involves
exactly.
those like or another one like Machiavelli reading The Prince. The first time I read that, I was like, I don't get some of these historical
Yeah.
contexts. You know what I mean? Like,
Right. I gotta go back to my reading of the Roman emperors.
yeah. Like, but and that itself is a fun like when it becomes at one point I can see where it just becomes burnout and you're just like you're marveling it. You know what I mean? There's parallel universes. The story never continues, but like,
Right.
or it does.
Well, I mean, and if you're trying to do it professionally, there's always the anxiety
Yeah.
of,
Yeah.
am I smart enough? Are people going to pay attention to this argument? Are people going to think this is an important take? Is this going to get me a job? Yeah, you layer all of that on top of it, and it's
Yeah.
spicy.
It's spicy to say the least. Oh man. And there's kind of a parallel with music in that sense that there's like except for is that the anxiety, I guess, if you really are
Yeah,
trying to fit into a specific niche. I want to play this venue, but I don't know any
right,
the folk standards. Are they gonna like my upside down folk? And the
right,
answer,
exactly.
but the beauty thing with music isn't it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Like there's an
Right,
outlet somewhere everywhere for everyone. And like
right,
but okay, so that's I can see where the novelization of like it's no one trying to defend their statement. It's just here's the context of it, and like it's almost more like in that sense, it's up to you. It's like the power of the metaphor becomes
right,
on you if it's impactful or not.
right, exactly.
That's beautiful. That's very cool,
Yeah.
man. Like, and I think it definitely comes through with this record, the last record, some of the work stuff I heard, like, and I think as far as like an outlet for you doing all that, like, I can see how impactful this was. Like, that's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, it's yeah. I pour all my intellectual ferment into into like writing 50 words for the lyrics of a song or something. It's very interesting.
And I guess that's the beauty of like the song approach or the poetic approach is it's like less is more in a way. So it's really trying
Yeah,
to
you have to really, yeah. It's like I'll agonize over a word choice that nobody but me is going to care about.
right, but that makes or breaks the musical phrase, the intention
Right.
of what's being said.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, selecting words for like tonal sounds and internal rhymes and weird stuff like that. I get a little obsessive about it.
Did you dive into poetry at all while studying this?
A little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are poets that I like. I never studied poetry in the sense of like understanding the techniques and the forms.
Yeah.
I just like there are poets that I like
Okay. Okay.
and I think about, and so like but my reading is more prose, but like prose that has a kind of poetic aspect to it where it's unusual prose, where somebody is meticulous about it.
Was it? Well, I mean, like coming from your background, it can only be like who are some of the poets that you dig?
Um, I like Paul Celan. How else do I think about? It's the only one that's jumping to mind right now. I don't read a lot of it now.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, when you're working your way through some Thomas Mann, you don't have time.
Right.
Well, beautiful, man. Well, Joe, thank you so much for chatting with me and let me pick your brain a little bit.
Not a problem at all. This is fun. I
Yeah,
didn't realize I was going to talk for 20 minutes about philosophy.
that's awesome. I guess one last thing I wanted to ask is, I read or heard somewhere, your first concert was the Violent Femmes.
Yes.
And have you circled being in Milwaukee, playing this type of music? Any of those guys?
I don't know any of them personally. They're like around, and I think one of them plays in a band called the 1913 now,
Yeah,
and I've
Victor,
seen
the
them play
drummer.
once or twice. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean I know people who know them, but I'm not personally acquainted with them.
Okay, well, I just kind of hitting that first. And the other thing was that first tune on this record, that what we'll call the chorus line, like
Hmm.
the repeating line. It strikes really like similar to me as like Mike Watt's like first rock opera. Like there's these
Oh.
certain like these building like tensions and like musically, and then there's like the like the Watt is
Oh,
on the
okay.
melodic
Okay.
choice there.
Well, I'm a huge Mike Watt fan,
Yeah,
and I was on his radio show last
yeah,
week,
I heard
which
it.
was
That's
very
awesome.
very exciting. Yeah. So no, I've been the like Minutemen Firehose, his post Firehose solo work. It's kind of like that's a big through line for me
Okay,
of things that I listen to a lot.
that's awesome. That's yeah. When
Yeah.
you go on Watch show, he's kind of like, "Here we go," and like
Right.
he goes
Yeah.
super
Yeah.
quick, and then it's like, "All
Yeah. He
right, we're
does.
back." Like,
Exactly.
and then he's like doing one-liners, and you're like, "Wait, what?"
Right.
My band was
Yeah, it's like I was given some warning pre. It was like he's going to ask you questions, and you've got maybe two sentences before he's off running in another direction.
he's got his own language. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
when you talk to him about certain things, like he's got his own words for things, and you're like, "Wait, what?" Like,
Hmm.
oh
Yeah.
man,
Yeah.
I was lucky enough. My band was lucky enough to be on it too. Like, me and my bass player are huge Watt fans. We grew up like
Yeah.
admiring Watt, and like, so that's so cool that you guys got to do that, or you got to do that as well.
Right. Right. Yeah. I was very excited.
Well, awesome, man. So, any plans for this? Because you have a video for every song, and
I do.
the
We do.
23rd you're having a film fest for it.
Yes.
Oh, that's the other question. Was a Rest Cure, is that
Hmm.
also a reference to Magic Mountain?
It is. The
Okay.
rest cure is when the lyrics aren't as much, but the because the lyrics are about this weird reading of I believe it was in the Public Domain Review. There was this article about death masks and Walt Whitman's death mask in
Yeah, yeah.
particular. There was some story that like that some of his whiskers were preserved in the death mask. Like because it's like a plaster, put it over the face. Because it's like it was pre photography, and so that like some musings on that, and then the notion of the rest cure, which is when a tuberculosis patient would be like wrap themselves up in a blanket and sit out on the veranda in the cold air, That's, that was supposed to cure something. They call that the rest cure.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, the desk mask thing really stuck out too, and that's what a weird kind of interesting concept. This whole to see someone's face when they're, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
do you know the
I mean, and
lineage?
then what's that?
Do you know the lineage on that? I don't know anything about it. It's just always been kind of
Well,
strange to me.
it was a means of preserving the likeness before they had photography.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was like a documentation of it's like the last documentation of the person's life is the death mask after they die. And so and then the rest of the lyrics of that song is just sort of like me thinking about wanting to ask Walt Whitman these questions about now that we're in a new Gilded Age, what do we do? Exactly.
Yeah, that's very, very cool. Very cool. But anyway, so all this, and I guess there's all these clocks in these videos
Yes.
too. Is that kind of referring to? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so the Rest Cures video, which was recently made public. We've got some premieres coming up over the next few weeks, and so as they premiere, I make them public on our YouTube channel as well. But that was the video that started me down onto this having a video for every song on the record project, and it was a video that I had wanted to do for a while. I don't know where the idea came to me, but it was the band is walking through a forest, and we come upon a clearing, and there's a grandfather clock sitting in the clearing, and we notice with alarm that the clock is set to 2 minutes to midnight. And we run off, get our surgical gear, do surgery on the clock, and we're successful. And it's now 3 minutes to midnight. So that was the idea of that. And so in order to pull that video off, I needed to acquire a clock. And so I just went to thrift stores and antique stores, and I found this clock. And then once I had it, the fellow that did the Rest Cure video for us, a guy named Brian Thyssen, he did 2 other videos for us, and the clock appears in both of those other videos. And then sort of by happenstance, some of the other videos that were made for us kind of featured clock ideas, not the same clock, but and then that clock is actually the cover star of the album. It's the same clock in the videos and on the cover of the record.
Okay. It's cool. It's cool. Sometimes when you visualize the kind of sonic concept of something, how things
Right.
like that become a cool little mementos and importances.
Yeah.
So okay, so there's a song for everyone, and there's a film fest that's gonna, or is
Yes.
that just okay? So
since we had a video made for every song on the record, I was like, well, we should have an event about this that isn't just the record release show. So we're going to do a record release show. It's a week from yesterday, so it's Friday the 14th is our record release show. And then the following Sunday, a week later Sunday on the 23rd, we're having the inaugural Resurrectionist Film Fest. And what we're going to do is play all the videos and then play other work by the people who made the videos for us. So there's 9 songs on the record, 6 different people made videos. So then I'm going to show the videos and then show other work by the people who made them for us.
You got a theater for that, or are you doing a?
It's at Cactus Club in Milwaukee, which is a long-standing venue, small venue, and Kelsey, the owner, has been wanting to kind of expand out into other kinds of events like film.
That's awesome.
And other kinds of community events. Yeah, she purchased. She was a longtime employee who purchased the bar from the old owner when he retired, and she's done some marvelous things with it.
That's cool. That's cool. When you see someone who's sees the potential and stuck with it and gets the chance to act upon it, especially. Yeah, that's awesome. Sorry.
She was actually for example, she was instrumental in convincing Milwaukee City Council to change certain ordinances so we can have more all ages shows. She does some real work.
She's the DIY queen. That's awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
Very cool. Awesome, man. Well, Joe, thank you so much for chatting with me, man. And I enjoyed diving into the zigzag pattern of your career that I was able to track and dive into these records, and I appreciate the philosophical insights and getting me into Thomas Mann. That was cool.
Excellent. I'm glad.
Yo, Spike Spiegel here. You just listened to Zig at the Gig podcast. Keep riding the bebop. See you, Space Cowboy. Bang.